Friends, this is the story of a bride who had dreamt of many beautiful moments for her wedding night. But little did she know that she was about to marry a snake. The real shock came when the snake approached her, and the entire night it tortured her body. The next day, she went to the king and told him everything. The king decided to see for himself and went undercover that night. What he saw shocked him. Out of a large chest, a snake emerged and wrapped itself around the girl's body, continuing its torment throughout the night. Friends, please stay with this story until the end. And if you're new to our channel, don't forget to subscribe. The weather in the kingdom was pleasant, with gray clouds floating in the sky, creating a beautiful atmosphere. During this time, Queen Aliyah invited the royal physician to the palace, where the king had been sitting, being examined by the physician. The king had been working continuously for the past 2 days, which had made him feel unwell. Queen Aliyah called for the royal physician to examine him. After examining the king, the physician informed Queen Aliyah that the king had a mild fever, likely from the stress of continuous work without rest. The physician suggested that the king should be taken to a place with good air and a soothing atmosphere for recovery. Upon hearing this, King Muazzam smiled at the physician and said, "You want me to go hunting? I've been wanting to for a long time but couldn't find the time. Since my health has given me the chance, why not make use of it?" Queen Aliyah was pleased by this and ordered the soldiers to prepare the horses for a hunting trip. King Muazzam gathered his gear and, along with his soldiers, headed towards the forest to improve his health. They traveled to the densest, vastest jungle at the kingdom's furthest border, where all kinds of animals were found. They left the kingdom in the morning and reached the forest by noon, where the king began hunting. The king spotted a beautiful deer and chased it, losing his entourage in the process. The deer soon disappeared from sight, and the king found himself lost in the dense forest. Before he could turn back, he heard a cry, almost as if someone was sobbing. He spurred his horse towards the sound and was shocked to see a girl dressed in bridal attire, running frantically. She tripped and fell when her foot hit a stone. The king immediately dismounted and rushed to her. He asked if she was okay and why she was dressed as a bride. The girl looked at him with fearful eyes, but before she could answer, she started to run again. The king grabbed her hand and asked, "Why are you running? What's going on?" The girl, panicked, replied, "Please let me go. I need to meet the king. I've been running away from home for days. I've been trapped for 3 days, and now I need to meet the king. It's very important." The king, surprised, revealed his identity, saying, "I am the king of this kingdom. I'm not in the palace right now, but I'm here hunting in the forest. Tell me, what is so urgent that you need to meet the king?" The girl's eyes widened in astonishment, and she looked around, unsure whether to trust him. Just then, the king's soldiers appeared on horseback. Now certain that this man was indeed the king, the girl took a deep breath, joined her hands in prayer, and said, "Your Majesty, I've heard much about you and your ability to solve people's problems. But my issue is so strange and unique that you'll be shocked when you hear it." The king nodded, reassuring her, "I am the servant of the people, and no problem is too great for me to solve. Please don't hesitate. Tell me your problem. I will try my best to help you." The girl began to cry, tears streaming down her face as she said, "My issue is unlike anything you've heard. Last night, I was married to a snake, and that snake tormented me all night. It left marks all over my body from biting and scratching me. The pain was unbearable. I fled my house because I couldn't endure it anymore. Every night, it comes out of nowhere and continues to hurt me. My screams fill the night until morning, and I endure terrible pain. Please, Your Majesty, help me. I can't live like this anymore." The girl broke down in front of the king, crying uncontrollably, her body shaking with sobs. The king listened carefully and, after a moment, said, "Your story is certainly unusual, but how can I be sure that what you are saying is true?" As soon as he spoke these words, the girl pulled back her dupatta and showed the king the marks of the snake's fangs on her arms. The king was now convinced. The king did not say much more to the young girl. He simply told her, "By tonight, your problem will be resolved. You look extremely frightened, and it seems you have fled here in fear. I advise you to return home. By tonight, everything will be fine. Poitis." Upon hearing this, the young girl immediately got up and ran off in the direction she had come from. The king turned to head back to the palace, and all the soldiers were left puzzled. They couldn't understand why the king was acting this way. Just the morning before, his mood had been very cheerful, but now, as evening approached, he was ordering them to return to the palace, even though he had originally planned to hunt for 2 days, staying in the jungle, and had already divided his duties among his officers. But now, all of a sudden, the king's decision had changed, and the soldiers could not make sense of it. Without asking any questions, they followed the king's footsteps, and thus the army, which had arrived in the forest by midday, made their way back to the palace by evening. As soon as the king returned to the palace, he headed straight for his bedroom. Queen Aliyah, who had been reading, was surprised to see the king return in such a hurry. She immediately asked, "What happened, Your Majesty? You look troubled. You had planned to hunt for 2 full days and assigned responsibilities for the kingdom, so why the sudden return?" King Muazzam explained everything that had happened in the jungle, telling her, "I can't explain it, but after hearing her story, something in my heart told me that this girl truly needed help. She is no supernatural being, but a living, breathing human." There was nothing in her manner or gestures that made me think otherwise. The way her cries echoed through the forest, and the marks she showed me on her body, they all seemed real. It's clear she is telling the truth, and that she was indeed married to a snake. But what baffles me is how she is still alive. A snake's bite, if untreated, can kill you immediately, yet she is unharmed, despite the snake tormenting her all night. This problem seems too complicated, as if some other power is at play. That's why I decided to cancel my hunt and return to the palace, to calm my mind and think through a solution. I promised her that her problem would be solved by tonight. Queen Aliyah listened intently and replied, "Indeed, this is a very serious matter. It seems to me that some evil forces may be involved. You should investigate thoroughly to find out who arranged this girl's marriage to a snake and what the purpose behind it all is." The king nodded in agreement, quickly changed his clothes, and made his way to the palace court. The soldiers, awaiting his orders, stood at attention. The king seated himself on the throne and called for his most trusted and capable soldier. He said, "Today something strange happened in the jungle. I was separated from the convoy when I saw a young woman. She told me that she had been married to a snake, and that the snake tormented her every night. She managed to escape and came to me with her story. Now, I need your help to investigate this. Go back to that jungle and find out where she is from, and how much truth there is in her words. Is she really telling the truth, or is there something else going on? You must go now, before nightfall, and bring back all the information I need." The king also ordered 2 other soldiers to accompany his most trusted one, and without hesitation, the soldiers mounted their horses and rode off. The king remained in the palace, waiting for their return, while also attending to other important matters of the kingdom. Meanwhile, the soldiers, following the king's orders, returned to the forest where the young girl had told her story. Upon arrival, they discovered that there was no settlement in sight. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, they eventually came across signs of habitation. a row of 10 small huts, all in a straight line. The soldiers quietly moved toward the huts. The area was bathed in darkness, and with nightfall, a heavy silence descended. They stopped near some bushes, waiting to see what would happen next. As they waited, they saw a man pass by with a large, dark-colored sack slung over his shoulder. In the dim light, they couldn't make out his face, but they noticed that the sack appeared very heavy, and the man was struggling to carry it. The soldiers grew alert and concealed themselves in the bushes, watching where the man was heading. His footsteps led him to the last hut in the row, and he disappeared inside. The soldiers exchanged looks and cautiously approached the hut. Before long, they heard a loud scream, followed by the sound of a girl sobbing uncontrollably from inside the hut. In the dark of the night, the sound became unmistakable, like someone crying out in great pain, as if enduring tremendous suffering. Upon hearing this, the 3 soldiers immediately rushed into the hut where the man had entered. However, they were stunned to find a young woman dressed in red bridal attire, trembling with fear. Her screams echoed throughout the village, and the soldiers searched the area but found neither the man nor the snake. They clearly saw that the girl's body bore marks of abuse, with multiple snake-bite scars, but there was no snake in sight, nor any trace of the man who had entered the hut. Confused and shocked, the soldiers hesitated for a moment, but then decided to return. As they mounted their horses, they heard a strange rustling sound from the bushes. They became certain that the snake must be nearby, possibly hiding in its den, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. They began their journey back to the palace, ready to report what they had discovered. By the time they arrived at the borders of the kingdom and reached the central area, the Fajr prayer was being announced, signaling the arrival of dawn. As they entered the palace court, they were surprised to find the king already engaged in his Fajr prayers. He had waited the entire night for their return. Once he had completed the prayer, the king turned to look at them. One soldier stepped forward and recounted everything that had happened. "Your Majesty," the soldier said, "as soon as we heard the girl's cries, we rushed into the hut. But, to our astonishment, neither the man nor the snake was present. We searched the hut thoroughly, but it was empty. The girl was the only one there, and she was in a critical state. Her body was covered with red marks, which seemed like snake bites, but there was no snake in sight. We also found no trace of the man who had entered earlier. We did, however, have one soldier stationed outside the hut, and he confirmed that no one had exited after the man entered. We could not make sense of it, so we decided to take the girl to the royal physician, as her condition was too serious." The king listened attentively, his face showing concern. "Where is she now?" he asked. "She is in the royal physician's clinic," the soldier replied. "She is unconscious, and we brought her there to help us understand the nature of the marks on her body and to see if she could assist in our investigation once she regains consciousness." The king nodded thoughtfully. "It was a wise decision to bring her here," he said, "but we must investigate further. We need to understand what is really happening. For now, you may return to your duties, and I will speak to the physician myself." After sending the soldiers back to their posts, the king made his way to the royal physician's clinic. The clinic was located just a short distance from the palace. The royal physician was already tending to patients after the Fajr prayer. Upon entering the clinic, the king saw the physician examining the unconscious girl, trying to determine why she had fainted and what the strange marks on her body might be. After a thorough examination, the royal physician turned to the king, his face showing clear signs of concern. "Your Majesty," he said, "this girl has fainted, and it seems as though she is under the influence of some drug. As for the marks on her body, they are not snake bites. A snake, once it bites a person, does not strike again. The snake knows that one bite is enough to kill its victim, so I am puzzled. What kind of snake is this that has been all over her body, leaving marks without killing her? This situation is extremely strange, and I believe something else is at work here. The king, deeply troubled, asked, "When will she regain consciousness?" "I cannot say for sure," the physician replied. "I do not know the cause of her fainting. If I knew, I would attempt to bring her back to consciousness. Perhaps the girl fainted from shock, or maybe it is due to some substance she has ingested. It is futile to try to wake her right now. When she regains consciousness, she will be able to tell us everything. For now, it is useless to question her." The king looked at the physician and then said, "No one should know that this girl is here, unconscious and under treatment. This must remain a secret." With that, the king left the clinic and mounted his horse, riding out toward the jungle once again, determined to uncover the truth behind this mysterious case. As the sun reached its peak in the sky, the king and his soldier arrived at the village near the forest. They began by questioning the local residents. One of them was an elderly man who had just stepped out of his hut. The king, disguised in a different attire, signaled him over. The old man, seeing the king's gesture, walked over cautiously. The king, without wasting time, asked, "What do you know about the girl living in that hut?" The old man looked at the hut with visible disdain and then turned to the king, asking, "What need do you have to inquire about her? No one here talks about her or helps her. People avoid her, and they prefer to stay away from anything connected to her." The king, curious and more concerned, asked immediately, "Why is that? Why does no one help her?" The old man, looking fearful, glanced around and motioned for the king to follow him. They walked deep into the forest, where the old man sat on a rock and began telling the king the girl's story. "There was an orphan girl who lived here," the old man started. "Her parents passed away only a few days ago. The truth is, her parents often fought. There was constant conflict in their household, and they never got along. The mother, feeling there was something spiritual troubling their family, went to a spiritual healer. The healer gave her some amulets to bring peace to her marriage. After that, her husband's behavior improved, and they stopped fighting. However, the mother began spending more time outside the house, and her husband grew suspicious. One day, when he followed her, he found out that she was visiting the healer daily. He confronted her and, in his rage, divorced her on the spot and dragged her back home. But as soon as he was about to announce the divorce, something strange happened. His words were halted, as if something was choking him. He died on the spot, struggling to breathe, as though someone had strangled him. The wife, witnessing this, began to fight some unseen force, waving her hands frantically, crying, and pleading with something invisible. In that moment, she too was lifted into the air and thrown to the ground. She died as well. At the time, their daughter was 18 years old. When the relatives came to collect her, they noticed that the family had spiritual problems. The healer suggested that her marriage to a snake would solve these issues. He said the snake would torment her for 3 consecutive nights, and after that, she could marry a proper man. Strangely, her relatives agreed and arranged for her to marry the snake. The king was shocked by the old man's story. "Why did no one help her?" he asked. The old man lowered his voice, looking around nervously. "The healer has forbidden anyone from helping the girl. Anyone who tries to intervene will be cursed with the same spiritual problems that plague her family. That's why no one dares to help her. We can't get involved." The second night has passed, and tomorrow, the girl's connection to the snake will be over. She will be married to a young man, as the healer promised. The king, now furious, stood up. "This is intolerable," he said, his face burning with anger. Without another word, he turned and marched toward the royal physician's clinic. When he arrived, he was shocked to find that the girl had regained consciousness. She was sitting there, trembling, her eyes filled with tears as she saw the king. "Your Majesty," she sobbed, "you promised me that my problem would be solved by nightfall, but I have spent 2 days in agony. Now, another day is passing, and I am still in torment." The king, gazing at her with a mixture of compassion and fury, replied, "You never told me the full truth, but I have learned through my investigations that your marriage to the snake is the result of a spiritual agreement. Why did you hide this from me?" Upon hearing this, the girl buried her face in her knees and began crying uncontrollably, her body shaking with sobs. Between gasps, she said, "I don't know what is happening to me. All I know is that I lose consciousness during the day, and at night the snake comes into my house and leaves marks on my body. I have no memory of anything that happens. The only time I regain my senses is when I run toward your palace. But even then, I am too weak to fight back. I don't know why I feel like my mind is numb, as though someone is controlling me. It's as if my thoughts are not my own." The king, now deeply concerned, suggested, "Rest for now. Let me ask you one thing. Do you know where the healer is, the one who promised to solve your family's problems?" The girl, still weeping, nodded and said, "The healer lives near the forest, though I don't remember exactly where. I have never been to his house. All I know is that he comes here on Thursdays." The king immediately ordered his soldiers to prepare their horses. "We are going to find this healer," he commanded. The king and his soldier, with little time to waste, set off into the forest, asking the locals for directions. Eventually, they were told that the healer went into the forest every Thursday. The king, realizing it was Thursday, decided to wait for the healer in the forest. That evening, the king and his soldier hid, watching as the healer set up a fire and began muttering strange incantations. Suddenly, the healer rose and started speaking aloud to an unseen presence. "Tonight, I will spend my final night with the girl. After this, no one will be able to take the power that will be mine." The king's eyes narrowed as he prepared to confront the healer. As soon as he said this, he slung the same sack with the potion over his shoulder. The soldier then told the king that this was the man who had entered the girl's hut that night, and after that, no one had seen him. Upon hearing this, the king immediately ordered to pursue him, and both of them began chasing the healer. The man entered the same hut where the young girl was. Just as he was about to enter and was surprised to find no one inside, he saw a girl dressed in bridal attire waiting for him. The healer smiled and approached her, saying, "O young girl, today I will not torment you as a snake, but today as a living man, I will fulfill my desires with you. Today, no one will save you." As he moved closer and lifted her veil, he was shocked to find a man in the girl's bridal attire with a beard and mustache. His face quickly twisted with anger, and he loudly asked the person, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" The man drew his sword, placed it on the healer's neck, and said, "Whoever you are, I have figured out your game, and I will expose your true face to everyone." Before the healer could retreat in fear and run away, he saw that another person was already standing at the door. Seeing this second figure, the ground seemed to slip beneath the healer's feet, as he realized it was the king. The king's face shone with such light that it instilled immense fear in the healer. The king, standing at the door, blocked his path, and the glow on the king's face seemed to tell the story of his devoutness. The king stepped forward, glaring at the healer with rage, and asked, "Who are you, and what is your purpose? Why are you tormenting this girl, and why did you marry her off to a snake?" Upon hearing this, The healer laughed and replied, "Nothing can stop me now. Tonight is my last night, and I will gain many powers. With my strength I will find her, and my demonic powers will help me. Soon I will sacrifice her and become the most powerful man in this kingdom." But little did I know that all my plans were about to be destroyed. The king immediately signaled, and a net fell from above, trapping the healer. The healer screamed and cried out as he struggled. The king commanded the soldiers to bring him, still trapped in the net, to the royal court and announced that he would address the people the next morning. An announcement was made throughout the kingdom, inviting all people to the royal court to hear the king's important address. The king also ordered that the young girl, who was receiving treatment in the healing chamber, be brought as well. The next morning, the king appeared in a field adjacent to the palace where a crowd had gathered. The soldiers brought the healer, still ensnared in the net. Upon seeing him, the women gasped and covered their mouths in shock. They recognized him as the most famous healer in the kingdom, the one women visited for spiritual problems and who gave them talismans and advice. But seeing him here, they were stunned. They did not know what his true identity was. The king had him imprisoned and ordered the soldiers to thoroughly interrogate him the next morning. They were to ask him everything and ensure that he gave the correct answers. The healer was brought before the crowd after his net was cut, and the king stepped forward, placing a sword on his neck. "You were going to die anyway," the king said, "so now is your chance to say something in your defense." But the healer, calm as ever, replied, "Last night I received great powers. No one can harm me now." The king asked, "What was your relationship with this young girl?" The healer laughed maniacally and replied, "Her mother came to me for her husband's treatment. I took advantage of the situation and told her that her husband would get better if she spent 3 nights with me. Since she was desperate, she agreed, and when she came to me the first day, her husband found out. I used my demonic powers to kill him, and his wife couldn't bear the shock and died right there. People thought they died because of their quarrels, but I had a different plan. I needed to spend 3 nights with her to gain my power, but she died before I could finish. So I turned to her 18-year-old daughter, and when her relatives came to take her, I pretended to be a wise man and scared them, telling them that unless her spiritual problems were resolved, no man could marry her without dying. They believed me, and I told them to marry her to a poisonous snake for 3 days. After that, she could marry any normal man. Her relatives, knowing that her parents' deaths were caused by such powers, agreed and followed my instructions. I carried out the ritual and sent them away. Now, the girl was completely in my grasp. I tormented her as a snake and left marks of my cruelty all over her body. This was the healer's confession before the king and the people. He continued, "Last night was supposed to be the final strike, and after that, she was supposed to die. But somehow, she managed to secretly alert the king about my plans. However, none of this affects me. I have already achieved my goal, and I will burn them all to ashes." As soon as he raised his hand and tried to chant a spell, he blew towards them, but the incantation had no effect. The king smiled and stepped forward, placing his sword on the healer's neck. "What do you think you are doing? You are dealing with me, the king, who is the ruler of this kingdom and the servant of the people. I had already chosen a man of righteousness to deal with demonic forces like yours, and he has stripped you of all your powers. Now, you can no longer harm anyone." The king then addressed the women in the audience directly, saying, "Never seek the solution to your problems from anyone who advises you to do un-Islamic or un-Sharia acts, or demands something that goes against Islamic teachings. If you ever come across such a person, know that he is a fake healer and a fraud. He knows nothing but how to deceive people and exploit them. He even causes rifts in relationships. Always go to those who follow the righteous path, those who can guide you through the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah. Anyone who suggests anything outside of this will be misled. After today, no such person should remain in this kingdom. I, as the king, denounce such individuals and will take action against anyone who exploits people using demonic powers. With that, the king swiftly severed the healer's head in front of everyone, and the healer met his end. This man had tortured the young girl by transforming into a snake, using her as a means to restore his powers while avoiding suspicion. He had also destroyed her family, killing her parents and ruining her life, all in pursuit of his own selfish goals. However, the young girl, using her wisdom, had informed the king about the situation. The king launched an investigation and freed the girl from the healer's cruel grasp. The healer's business was nothing but poisoning people's lives, sowing misunderstandings among them, and then using their vulnerabilities to regain his powers. After the healer's demise, the king ordered the soldiers to arrest anyone in the kingdom who practiced spiritual healing through un-Islamic or unlawful means. No one would be allowed to visit such people again, and anyone who made un-Islamic demands would be considered a fraud and deceiver, preying on people's innocence to ruin their lives. The king arranged for the young girl to marry one of his loyal soldiers and ensured she received full treatment so that she would never face such hardships again. In this way, the king solved a complex issue with his wisdom and insight, ensuring peace and justice for his people.